When you hear the name Genghis Khan, what instantly springs to mind? For a lot of people, I think it's this image of, relentless conquest, vast, thundering armies, maybe even a kind of primal dread.
Endless steps, cavalry.
Exactly. Cities crumbling. I mean, the sheer scale of his military triumphs, it's monumental, right? And it
Yeah.
often overshadows pretty much everything
It
else.
really does. That's the dominant picture.
But what if we told you there's actually so much more to this story, like a whole layer of complexity beneath that common perception?
Yeah.
What if this figure, who looms so large in history, celebrated by some, absolutely condemned by others, wasn't just a terrifying conqueror? What if he was also maybe a visionary state builder? Someone whose impact is still felt today?
That's the fascinating paradox, isn't it?
It really is. So our mission today in this deep dive is to really explore the sources we've gathered. We want to get into the intricate life, the profound impact, and the incredibly complex legacy of this man, whose birth name actually was Temujin.
Right. Not Genghis Khan originally.
Not originally, no. So together, we'll journey with you from his incredibly challenging childhood. And it was challenging through the huge task of unifying those disparate, constantly warring Mongol tribes.
Which was no small feat.
Not at all.
Mm.
We'll look at his military genius, which is undeniable, but also understand his revolutionary approach to governance, something that went way beyond just tribal custom. And then finally, look at the astonishing, lasting global impact he had. I mean, shifts that really reshaped continents and cultures for centuries.
Absolutely.
So get ready for some genuine aha moments, because you might encounter some surprising insights into his methods. Maybe even some unexpected, almost paradoxical, positive consequences of his actions you hadn't considered.
Well, it's truly compelling when you think about it. How one individual, Temujin, born into such relentlessly harsh conditions, we're talking 12th century Mongolia,
Right.
how could he not only manage to unite an entire nomadic people, but also fundamentally reshape the political and cultural landscape of the world? It's a story that goes way beyond just military might.
Yeah, it's more than just battles.
Exactly. If you look at the wider historical context, his story isn't just about armies or brute force. It's really about profound transformation. He laid the very seeds, you could argue, of what we might recognize as modern statecraft.
Centuries before Europe in some ways.
In many ways, yes. Centuries before many European nations adopted similar centralized systems, and he did it within a nomadic society, which is even more remarkable. So this deep dive hopefully will reveal the crucial why it matters behind his military innovations, his administrative genius, and those far-reaching social reforms. We're kind of offering you a shortcut, really, to understanding one of history's most impactful and, let's be honest, most debated figures.
Definitely debated.
Without question. You'll hopefully gain a richer insight into how a man from such humble and frankly brutal beginnings could rise to become this colossal historical figure. Someone whose decisions and vision ended up affecting populations and continents on a scale that was just unprecedented.
Yeah, and it's a story that really begins in a place of extreme hardship. Let's get into what we're calling the crucible of leadership, Temujin's formative years.
Okay.
I mean, imagine this. A childhood defined by extreme hardship, constant threat, and deep betrayal. Temujin was born around 1162, probably near the Onan River, northern Mongolia. And this environment, it was brutally unforgiving in every sense.
Right. Constant tribal conflict.
Relentless tribal conflict, yeah. Alliances were like shifting sand, treacherous, and the natural conditions themselves, unbelievably harsh, often fatal. Survival wasn't just a challenge, it was a daily struggle, never guaranteed.
You couldn't take anything for granted.
Absolutely nothing. And it's right here, in this early phase, that we find this pivotal event, a moment that truly set his life's path. His father, Yasuge, who was a respected leader, head of the Kiad tribe, was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tatars specifically.
And Temujin was just a boy.
Just a boy, maybe 9 years old. And this wasn't just a personal tragedy, In that society, it was a catastrophe for the whole family.
It meant losing everything. Status, protection.
Everything. The immediate aftermath was devastating. Complete social ostracization. They were ruthlessly cast out by their own clan, the Taishiud, left utterly vulnerable in a world where kinship and tribal loyalty meant survival.
So they were basically abandoned.
Totally abandoned, faced immediate severe poverty, left to fend for themselves in this brutal landscape. No protection, no resources, no support. It's hard to even imagine the vulnerability, the fear, The sheer desperation they must have felt. They were literally foraging for roots, wild fruits, hunting whatever small game they could find, often starving.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of a leader's future success is forged in that kind of fire, in those early struggles, versus, something inherent.
Yeah, nature versus nurture almost.
Kind of. For Temujin, this period of intense adversity, the constant power struggles, those shifting alliances, it was undeniably critical. It wasn't just a tough childhood. It was like a grueling masterclass in survival, resilience, and crucially strategic thinking.
He had to learn fast.
Incredibly fast. He was forced to develop this unparalleled self-reliance. He had to learn not just to endure, but to observe, to plan, to act decisively. He had to hone raw skills for just surviving, and maybe more importantly for leadership, from an incredibly early age. It was sheer necessity.
Learning to read the landscape, people.
Both the physical terrain and the intricate, often treacherous social dynamics, exactly. Anticipating threats, making incredibly hard, sometimes brutal decisions just to keep his family alive. He was even captured himself at one point, escaped. That must have sharpened his cunning, his resolve even further.
Absolutely.
And this direct, painful experience with tribal disunity and weakness, seeing firsthand how easily a family or a small tribe could be just destroyed by infighting, betrayal, enemies, that seems to have deeply fueled his later unyielding drive for unity, for order.
It became his mission.
It really did. It was the absolute foundational blueprint for his eventual empire. He saw the chaos that fragmented power brought, the endless cycles of revenge, and he lived its devastating consequences. This personal history, abandonment, betrayal, struggle, it seems to have instilled in him this deep-seated, almost messianic conviction.
That only unity could save them.
Pretty much. That only absolute unity, ruthless discipline, and a single shared purpose could ensure survival and eventually prosperity for his people. He wasn't just building an empire for power's sake, you could argue. He was creating a shield against the very chaos he'd endured. His desire for order wasn't abstract. It was deeply, deeply personal.
That makes perfect sense. You can see how those early experiences would just embed that need for unity deep within him. So how did this young man, forged in that fire, manage to translate that vision into uniting these notoriously fragmented Mongol tribes and ultimately claim that formidable title we all know?
Right, the big step.
Yeah, the big step we're moving into from Temujin to Genghis Khan, the unification in the title. So his power had been growing steadily through his young adult life. He was building alliances, winning skirmishes, showing remarkable charisma, a sharp strategic mind.
Gathering followers.
Gathering followers, exactly. By 1206, his influence was really peaking. And this wasn't just about winning battles. It was about strategically consolidating influence, gaining respect, and, yeah, probably inspiring outright fear among other tribal leaders. So in that huge year, 1206, this grand assembly, known as a cruelty, was called. And this wasn't just some informal get-together.
No, it was a major ritualistic event.
Hugely significant. Brought together all the major Mongol tribal leaders, dignitaries, powerful figures from all across the steppes. And it was at this cruelty, a real turning point in history, totally reordering the Mongol world, that Temujin was formally given that sacred, powerful title, Genghis Khan.
And the meaning behind that name.
Right, so the implications are vast. The name Genghis Khan isn't just a cool title. It embodies an entire ideology, a new world order, a unified vision. It's been interpreted in a few ways, all carrying immense weight. Universal emperor, ruler of the world, maybe great ocean, signifying this supreme, almost cosmic authority.
Over everything.
Over everything, not just the Mongol tribes, but implicitly the entire known universe. It was a clear declaration. A new unified era for the Mongols had begun, and a pretty stark warning to everyone else.
And it's truly compelling to remember that this was so much more than just a name change or some ceremony. It was the symbolic and the actual political unification of those famously fragmented Mongol tribes.
Right. It wasn't just for show.
Not at all. This event marked a profound, irreversible shift. Before this, you had centuries of tribal warfare, shifting loyalties, banditry, individual conflicts. It constantly kept the Mongol peoples weak and divided. Genghis Khan didn't just bring them together, he fundamentally transformed them.
From squabbling clans into what?
Into a cohesive, singular entity. He molded them into a highly disciplined, incredibly organized, and singularly purpose-driven military force. A unified nation, really, with a common destiny. This meant moving beyond those ingrained centuries of infighting towards a common goal, a shared vision under one supreme leader.
That must have been a huge psychological shift, too.
Absolutely. A monumental aha moment for the entire Mongol people. A collective realization of the power of shared vision, disciplined structure, overcoming those deep-seated divisions. The very idea of Mongol as a unified, powerful identity, not just a bunch of tribes. That really solidified right then. He gave them a purpose beyond their clan, a collective identity, a sense of shared destiny that would fuel everything that came next. He gave them something worth fighting for together.
And what a force they became. Okay, so from that moment of unification, we go straight into the blueprint of conquest, Genghis Khan's military deftness and innovation.
This is where many people focus.
It is. But his success wasn't just about brute force or having more soldiers, which is kind of the common but not quite accurate picture. His genius was in his systematic, revolutionary approach. To really get this, Genghis Khan didn't just fight, he innovated. He built his army on, well, unprecedented mobility, incredible tactical flexibility, strict, almost unbreakable discipline, and maybe most strikingly, this brutal but highly effective psychological warfare.
A potent combination.
Yeah, imagine an army that could cover vast distances faster than anyone, strike out of nowhere, vanish, then reappear somewhere else entirely, completely messing up enemy defenses.
So let's break that down. The cavalry first.
Let's do it. Mounted light cavalry. This was the heart, the absolute core of the Mongol army. Light-armored, swift, incredibly resilient horsemen. And these weren't just guys on horses. They were like extensions of their steeds.
Born in the saddle, practically.
Practically. They could ride for days, minimal rest, sustained by dried meat, fermented mare's milk kumis. Each warrior usually had several horses, letting them switch mounts mid-ride, preserving stamina. This let them cover astonishing distances, sometimes up to 100 miles a day.
Which would just leave infantry-based armies in the dust.
Completely dumbfounded. Their ability to cover ground quickly, execute sudden raids, set up ambushes from unexpected angles, totally unparalleled. They mastered the composite recurved bow, amazing range, piercing power, and they could fire accurately while galloping.
That's incredible skill.
Incredible. This constant mobility and firepower kept enemies perpetually off balance. They disrupted plans before they could even form. Masters of maneuver warfare like the famous feigned retreat.
Yes, pretending to flee to draw the enemy in.
Exactly. Draw them into a trap, then turn back for a devastating attack, often using the Parthian shot, firing backwards from horseback. Lethal.
Okay, so speed, maneuver, firepower. What about the psychological side you mentioned?
Right, psychological warfare. And this is where things get pretty chilling. Genghis Khan used ruthless tactics, really unprecedented at the time, specifically designed to demoralize enemies into surrendering quickly. Absolutely.
Calculated cruelty.
Calculated cruelty. While horrific, it wasn't just mindless destruction. Our sources suggest it was a meticulous strategic tool. The aim was to end wars quickly and prevent unnecessary losses, meaning Mongol losses, of course.
Right.
So, for example, the complete annihilation of some cities, every inhabitant killed or enslaved, served as this stark, terrifying warning to others.
The message was, resist and you're next.
Brutally clear. Resist, and your city, your people, your existence will be obliterated. Surrender, and you might live. Your city might be spared. You'd be integrated into the empire.
Yeah.
This calculated terror was incredibly effective. Cities often surrendered before the main Mongol army even showed up.
Looking at the bigger picture, Genghis Khan really did revolutionize warfare. His methods would influence military thinking for centuries. That emphasis on speed, agility, calculated terror, it wasn't just random violence. It was a deep strategy to break the enemy's will before major, costly battles began.
Saved his own men.
Exactly. It cleverly minimized the need for long sieges or those bloody, high-casualty fights against dug-in forces.
What else contributed to that effectiveness?
Well, a crucial element, often overlooked, was his focus on intelligence and communication networks. Genghis Khan put huge importance on gathering intel about his enemies, their strengths, weaknesses, troop movements, morale, even internal politics.
Knowing the enemy.
Absolutely. And he also had to manage his own vast, fast-moving army, so he developed the Yam. This was a highly efficient horse messenger system. Think relay stations, about 15-30 miles apart, all across the empire.
Like the Pony Express, but earlier and bigger.
Kind of, yeah. It allowed for incredibly rapid communication orders, reports, intelligence across huge distances. This let his commanders make quick, accurate decisions. He also used spies and scouts extensively, always wanted timely, accurate information. This information advantage was often as critical as any weapon.
That makes sense. Outthinking the opponent.
Precisely. And another key factor was his adaptation and technological integration. He was remarkably pragmatic about war, not tied to tradition. He didn't just conquer, he learned. He quickly adopted and integrated tech and techniques from the people he conquered.
Like what?
Well, the sources highlight Chinese siege machines, sophisticated trebuchets, catapults, even early gunpowder weapons, stuff the Mongols didn't have initially. He also adopted Persian archery techniques, engineering skills.
Yeah.
It all significantly strengthened his forces.
So he wasn't afraid to borrow good ideas.
Not at all. This relentless adaptability, this willingness to learn from enemies, made his army this truly formidable, constantly evolving force, always incorporating the best innovations from across the world. It was this constant learning and practical application, combined with their natural strengths, that made them almost unstoppable.
It really paints a picture of sophisticated military operations, doesn't it? Way beyond just barbarian hordes.
Absolutely.
But his genius wasn't only on the battlefield, and this is where the story gets maybe even more transformative, more eye-opening for many people. We're digging into, beyond the battlefield, Genghis Khan's administrative and social reforms.
Equally revolutionary in its own way.
Totally. His leadership wasn't just about winning wars, it was equally groundbreaking in how he managed and unified this vast, incredibly diverse empire. He seemed to understand deeply that conquest without good governance is just unsustainable. It leads to collapse.
Right, you have to hold it together.
Exactly. So he didn't just impose military rule. He introduced a centralized administrative system and, critically, a codified system of written laws. That became the backbone of the Mongol Empire. This wasn't a loose tribal confederation anymore. It was fast becoming an organized, coherent state.
And the key to that was the Yasa.
The Yasa, yeah.
Yeah.
The Yasai-Mongol, these were his laws. Strict, yes. Often brutally enforced, yes. But remarkably functional and visionary for the time. They were specifically designed to maintain social order across this huge multi-ethnic population, to reduce the constant tribal infighting that had plagued his people, and ultimately to strengthen the empire's unity.
And a key part was equality before the law.
That was revolutionary. A core principle in the Yasa was equality before the law for everyone, regardless of tribe, social status, even if you were from a conquered nation. That concept was just groundbreaking for nomadic society. It helped solidify his authority and created a sense of shared citizenship in a way.
It's genuinely fascinating to see how forward-thinking his administrative vision was. Many of these reforms were, in a real sense, precursors to things we associate with modern states, with universal law. He grasped that long-term stability needed more than just military muscle. It needed smart, adaptable governance.
So what other examples are there?
Well, take his policy of religious and cultural tolerance. Genghis Khan showed a truly remarkable degree of tolerance towards different religions and cultures. Our sources show that Buddhism, Christianity, and Nestorian mostly, but some Catholic contexts, later Islam, indigenous shamanism, they didn't just coexist, they were actively protected within the empire.
Why? Was he just personally tolerant?
Maybe partly, but it was also incredibly pragmatic, strategically brilliant. This tolerance fostered relative peace across huge territories. It reduced rebellions from conquered peoples, and it enabled continuous economic activity, the free flow of goods and ideas.
Makes sense. Less resistance, more trade.
Exactly. Conquered peoples, while under Mongol rule and paying taxes, weren't forced to abandon their core beliefs or cultures. This eased their integration and helped the empire's stability. It also allowed his administration to draw on talented people regardless of their background.
Smart. What about the administration itself?
He established a sophisticated centralized administration and bureaucracy, a huge departure from traditional nomadic structures, which were much looser. He appointed local administrators, often educated people from conquered lands, creating a formal imperial bureaucracy. They collected taxes, managed resources, enforced his decrees.
And you mentioned meritocracy earlier.
Yes, crucially, he relied on meritocracy in these appointments. People were chosen based on skills, loyalty, competence, not just their tribe, birth, or connections. This led to a much more efficient, effective state administration. His decrees got implemented, resources were managed properly across vast distances. It was a system designed for effectiveness.
And trade. You mentioned trade routes.
Yes, perhaps one of his most globally impactful reforms. The promotion of trade and security. Genghis Khan put huge strategic emphasis on securing major trade routes, especially the Silk Road, which had often been dangerous, plagued by bandits and local wars.
That's how you mean it safe.
Relatively safe, yes. Under Mongol authority, these routes became much more reliable and standardized. This didn't just help the flow of goods, silks, spices, metals. It rapidly accelerated the exchange of knowledge, technologies, culture between East and West on an unprecedented scale.
Like an early globalization.
You could definitely say that. He effectively kickstarted an early, expansive form of globalization, connecting distant civilizations, allowing innovations to travel across Eurasia in ways that were previously unimaginable. It really makes you think about how peace and prosperity, even after violent conquest, can be cultivated through smart, pragmatic administration. He knew a thriving empire needed a strong economy, and that needed secure trade.
That economic and cultural connection is just profound. It really highlights how his actions, even born from violence, had these massive, maybe unintended, positive consequences for global connectivity. And speaking of global reach, let's look at the global reach. Genghis Khan's conquests and empire's geographical expansion.
The sheer scale.
The sheer scale. I mean, try to wrap your head around this. In roughly 2 decades, under Genghis Khan, the Mongols carved out an empire that just defied imagination. It stretched from the heart of Central Asia, across deserts and steppes, all the way to northern China, swept through ancient Persia, and even pushed deep into Eastern Europe.
It redrew the map.
Literally redo the map. These weren't just military wins adding territory. They fundamentally reshaped political, economic, cultural structures across continents. Major power centers shifted. Pathways of interaction were totally altered.
So where did they go first, mainly?
Well, a major focus was China. The campaigns against the Jin dynasty were devastating, strategically brilliant. They conquered northern China relatively quickly. This marked the start of centuries of Mongol influence, eventually leading to the Yuan dynasty under his grandson, Kublai Khan.
Okay, and westward.
Then they pushed relentlessly west, into Iran and the Middle East. Major victories against the declining Seljuk Sultanate and other powerful Muslim states. They dismantled existing powers, secured control over those vital trade routes, and boosted their economic power immensely through tribute and trade. This opened up the resources and cultures of the Middle East to Mongol influence, and vice versa. Huge exchange there.
And Eastern Europe. That was later, mostly.
Mostly his successors, yes, but Genghis Khan's campaigns absolutely laid the groundwork. We should mention the campaigns under Batu Khan, his grandson, which brought numerous Russian principalities under Mongol-influenced tribute, manpower extraction for centuries, and pushed into Eastern Europe, establishing the Golden Horde. That dominated the region for ages. The speed of it all was just astounding.
Looking at the wider context, the sheer scale and the speed of these conquests were utterly unprecedented. Nothing like it before. Such vast, culturally diverse lands brought under single rule so quickly. But beyond the military feat, these conquests and the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace that followed.
Controversial term, maybe, given how it started.
Very controversial, but it describes a period of relative stability after the initial conquest. And it inadvertently created new connections, new pathways on a scale never seen before. The very act of subjugating these diverse regions fostered this unique, cross-continental exchange of ideas, tech, goods, despite the undeniably brutal way it began.
So the empire itself became a conduit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's compelling how these military successes translated into this vast network that profoundly impacted global interactions for generations. The Pax Mongolica, despite its violent birth, provided stability, security, unified administration across the staggering landmass. It allowed movement of people, goods, and crucially, innovations.
But also diseases, right, like the Black Death.
Tragically, yes. Diseases traveled much faster along these secured routes. The Black Death is the most horrific example. But so did crucial knowledge and transformative technologies. Think gunpowder, printing, paper money, navigation tools, new crops moving between East and West.
Wow.
It wasn't just territorial gain, it was the creation of this vast, interconnected system. It set the stage for later developments, even, paradoxically, the European age of exploration, which was partly spurred when these Mongol routes broke down later.
That interconnectedness really is a powerful theme, isn't it? Running through his whole legacy.
It truly is.
And speaking of legacy, let's turn to the aftermath. Death, descendants, and the enduring legacy. Genghis Khan himself died in 1227, possibly from battle injuries, maybe illness during a campaign against the Pangates. He'd built this empire of staggering scope. His death obviously was a huge challenge. How do you keep something that vast together without its founder?
The succession issue, always critical.
Right. So in the immediate aftermath, Following Mongol tradition, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons into these ulus, or appanages.
Right.
Now, this division definitely led to fragmentation. The empire split into powerful khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanates, eventually the Yuan dynasty in China.
So it didn't just collapse.
No, not immediately. And crucially, the fundamental structures, the administrative principles he'd established, they largely endured within these new states. The seeds of centralized governance, unified law, military organization he'd sown, they kept bearing fruit, just under different rulers from his family. It's kind of a testament to how robust his initial vision was.
The blueprint remained.
The blueprint remained, yeah. Even in division, his foundational work provided the framework for these new, powerful states.
And that really compelled us to think about that long tail of influence. Even after he died, his political philosophy, his administrative blueprint, his military organization, they continued to steer these successor states. His descendants, the Golden family, the Altan Urag, they carried forward his vision, often expanding it, adapting it to their own areas.
Who were the key figures among his descendants?
Well, let's highlight a couple of the most significant ones who really cemented that Mongol legacy. Kublai Khan, probably the most famous grandson, played the pivotal role in conquering all of China, establishing the Yuan dynasty in 1271.
A huge achievement.
Monumental. This wasn't just more conquest, it was institutionalizing Mongol rule over one of the world's oldest, most populous civilizations. Kublai extended the legacy deep into East Asia, moved the capital to Beijing, adopted Chinese administrative methods, embraced some Chinese culture while still keeping a distinct Mongol identity. He ushered in that era of cultural exchange, hosted Marco Polo. Then there was Batu Khan, another grandson. He founded the Golden Horde. This Khanate solidified Mongol dominance over the Russian principalities for nearly 250 years. Heavy tribute shaped Russia's political development for centuries, arguably isolating it from Western Europe during key periods, a formidable power in Eastern Europe.
So his vision really lived on through them.
It absolutely did. These examples show that Genghis Khan's vision, unified state, strong central authority, effective administration, formidable military, it persisted and evolved through his lineage. His yasa, his military structure, they were like the operating system for these new empires. It demonstrates the enduring power of his foundational ideas for stability, expansion, governance. His descendants, yeah, they fought amongst themselves sometimes, but they operated within the sophisticated framework he'd created.
It's just astounding how far-reaching his influence was, both directly and then indirectly through his family for centuries. Which brings us neatly to Genghis Khan's multifaceted impact on human history and debates. It kind of pulls it all together.
The big picture.
The big picture. And what really stands out here is that Genghis Khan's most profound contribution was arguably changing the very course of world history itself. It wasn't just about the Mongol Empire, it was about global transformation.
In what key ways?
Well, first, the strengthening East-West connections. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
But his unified empire massively boosted those previously weak, sporadic ties between East and West. The Mongol Empire acted like this unprecedented historical bridge. Ideas, goods, people, diseases flowing relatively freely across Eurasia. Unparalleled interconnectedness.
Okay.
Then, the idea of early examples of the modern state, the structure he built, centralization, meritocracy, which was radical, rule of codified law applied universally. You can clearly see these as incredibly early forms of modern state concepts. These weren't just random arrangements. They were deliberate attempts at lasting order, effective governance over a huge, diverse area, groundwork for the future. This links to the early steps of globalization. We've touched on it, but it's worth repeating. Securing the Silk Road, fostering coexistence among cultures and religions. It's one of the earliest, most impactful examples of large-scale global trade and cultural exchange. He got the value of commerce and stability for the empire's wealth and longevity. The sheer volume of trade and diffusion under the Pax Mongolica was off the charts.
And the military side.
And finally, the military revolution. Those innovative tactics, speed, psychology, combined arms, intelligence, logistics, they weren't just effective then. They were studied, adopted, modeled by other armies for centuries, including later European powers. He profoundly impacted military strategy worldwide, setting new, often terrifying standards for organizing, moving, and using armies effectively.
And it's truly compelling, isn't it, to observe the enduring, intense debate around Genghis Khan. His legacy is just undeniably, brutally complex. As historians, we have to constantly grapple with this paradox.
The good and the very, very bad.
Exactly. On one hand, you absolutely must acknowledge the immense destruction, the staggering loss of millions of lives caused by his armies, flourishing cities, Baghdad, Samarkand, countless places in China utterly obliterated, populations massacred, enslaved, displaced on a scale that's hard to fathom.
It's a horrific chapter.
It's a dark, undeniable chapter, immense suffering, deep scars that lasted generations. We cannot downplay that.
But
Looking at the wider historical context, historians consistently emphasize that alongside this devastation, his undeniable genius for state building and governance had equally profound, long-term, and sometimes positive impacts. Those unified trade routes, the exchange of ideas, the administrative innovations, the spread of technologies, they continued shaping the world long after the violence subsided. His empire, despite its brutal origins, paradoxically created this vast network that facilitated cultural flourishing and tech diffusion on a scale never seen before. A catalyst for global integration, yes, but through force.
so it forces us to ask that really difficult question.
It does. How do we genuinely reconcile the undeniable brutality, the immense suffering, with the lasting, transformative, and in some ways beneficial structures he put in place? It's a powerful reminder that history is rarely, if ever, black and white.
Yeah.
Figures like Genghis Khan force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, leadership, the often paradoxical nature of historical progress, how destruction can sometimes clear the ground for new kinds of order, connection, maybe even advancement, for better or worse. It challenges us to look beyond simple hero-villain stories.
So the profound implications are clear then. Genghis Khan remains one of history's most complex, most impactful, and most debated figures, precisely because of that inescapable duality. We've journeyed with you from that incredibly tough childhood marked by abandonment and hardship to his almost impossible unification of warring tribes into this disciplined force. We've explored how he revolutionized both warfare and governance, setting standards that echoed for centuries. And we've seen the indelible mark he left on global connections, literally shrinking the world through trade, travel, cultural exchange.
It's quite a story.
It is. His life isn't just a tale of conquest. It's like a masterclass in how a single leader, forged in adversity, can unite, govern, and fundamentally transform societies, setting the stage for shifts that reverberated for centuries, impacting how civilizations interacted and evolved, its vision meeting brute force and all the unexpected consequences.
And looking at that wider historical context, Genghis Khan's strategies, his reforms, his vision, they continue to guide historical inquiry, compel our attention today. His empire, for all its destructive force, was an undeniable conduit for change, both devastating and constructively transformative. Maybe the most provocative thought to leave you with is this. Consider how many systems and pathways we take for granted today, like international trade routes spanning continents, concepts of unified law across diverse populations, maybe even the idea of a merit-based bureaucracy, rapid communication networks. How many of those trace unexpected roots back to the very empire he forged through fire, strategic brilliance, and relentless will?
That's something to think about.
It is, which leads to an important question for you, our listener, to maybe ponder after this deep dive ends. How does truly understanding the complexities of figures like Genghis Khan, who embody both immense destruction and incredible far-reaching innovation, how does that challenge and maybe reshape your own views on leadership, on empire building, and on the often unpredictable, messy paths of historical progress?